Oh, here we go. Welcome to Gospel Tangents, the best source for Mormon history, science, and theology. I'm Rick Bennett. What was Joseph Smith's growing up like in Vermont? We'll find out more from Dr. Mark Staker. He's a return visitor here on Gospel Tangents, and he's doing an archaeological dig on the Tunbridge farm in Vermont. So we'll find out more about that with Dr. Mark Staker. He's got a fantastic book out on Joseph and Lucy Smith's Tunbridge farm. So we're going to talk more about that in our next conversation. You won't want to miss it. Check it out. All right, well, welcome to Gospel Tangents. I'm excited to have one of my very first guests back on the show. Could you go ahead and tell us who you are?
Yes, I'm Dr. Mark Staker. Glad to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
Now, can we call you the official archaeologist of the church? Is that a good title for you?
Probably not. We don't have an official archaeologist, but one of my colleagues, Ben Pickles, actually was a professor of archaeology at a university in New York, and so he handles a lot of the official activities, but we tend to go with outside firms to do most of the work. I did a private dig with a former colleague of mine. We went out together and did this one just on our own because we wanted to.
Well, cool. So, just quick reminder, like I said, I think you were my third guest ever. And we talked about your previous book. We're going to talk about a new book today, but can you just give us a kind of a thumbnail sketch of the previous book in Kirtland that we talked about?
Previous book was Hearken O Ye People, that focused on Joseph Smith's revelations in Kirtland, Ohio, and put those in context, but it was really a history of the sites that we restored in Kirtland and what I was able to learn about what happened in those sites. Primarily when Joseph Smith was there and the time before.
So one of my favorite, I don't know if I should say favorite things, you were the one that talked about how they, I don't know if plaster is the right word, but they did the outside of the temple. You know, there was the story that the saints broke up all their good china, and you kind of debunked that a little bit.
As I got deep in the sources and trying to figure out how that was all assembled together, I found reminiscences from people that said, as kids we went and we helped go to the garbage dumps and pick up the ceramics. And with my experience looking at artifacts and the settings, I knew that during that time period everybody threw everything out. There wasn't a garbage pickup, and so it didn't make sense to break your fine china to throw it in there when you knew that there was china and ceramics and other kinds of fragments everywhere. And so as I looked through the historical sources, it confirmed that people had just gone and picked up the garbage and threw it into the plaster. And I learned after our interview that Jacob Bump, who helped build the temple, actually went and got a patent on that plaster. Although he wasn't the one that had invented it, he went and got the patent for it. Oh,
you're kidding? Because I'm trying to remember who was the one who did it. Do you remember his name? I'm asking hard questions now.
I do. Artemis Millet.
There you go.
Artemis Millet.
Yeah. Cool.
So he's the one that had invented it, but he didn't get credit for it.
Yeah. So I'm just going to encourage my listeners, if you haven't seen our first interview, I thought that was fantastic. We talked about the temple. I actually had a GoPro camera out in Kirtland, so there's some shots of the Kirtland temple. So encourage everybody to go check that out. So
great.
All right, well, we're here about your new book, so why don't you tell us a little bit about your new book? Oh, before we do that, just wanted to get your background. I think you're a Florida Gator, is that right?
I am.
Yeah,
yes.
So Daniel Stone was also a Florida Gator. I don't think you were there at the same time, though. He's a lot younger.
No, we weren't there at the same time. But yeah, I got my PhD from the University of Florida in anthropology. And my colleague that wrote the book with me, Don Enders, he got a master's degree in archaeology and one in history from Brigham Young University. And then he spent more than 50 years actually doing archaeology at our sites. If there ever was an official church archaeologist, he was it.
Oh, okay.
He started out with the Nauvoo Temple in the 1960s, and then finished up doing the Joseph Smith home site in Palmyra, New York, and then restoring the Manchester frame home there. Did a lot of studying. We're working on some stuff right now together to help tell that story.
Well, that's cool. So, did you go to BYU for your undergraduate? I can't remember.
I did. I got an anthropology
so.
degree from BYU, and then a master's in international studies from BYU.
And then you went to hot Florida. Oof.
Yeah.
Well, cool. All right, well, tell us about your new book.
Our new book, as I mentioned, my colleague Don Enders and I, we're doing another major project looking at the early history of the Smith family. One area that we didn't know a lot about was their Vermont experience, and so we've worked intently trying to figure out all those details. And we knew that the Smith family had lived in Tunbridge, and there was a site there that everybody pointed to. Actually, Larry Dollar's a great picture of him pointing his finger down to the hole and saying, here's the site where Hiram Smith was born and where the Smith family lived. And we assumed that was the case, but nobody had ever really looked at it carefully, and there were some photographs that conflicted with that. The early George Edward Anderson photographs were of a big complex where he said Hiram was born, and if you looked at the mountains, they just weren't the same mountains. Something was wrong. And so we wanted to sort that out.
So it's the Green Mountains in Vermont, right?
And the Green Mountains in Vermont. And then there's Tunbridge Township. And in the township there are villages. And I've noticed that a lot of people that live out in the western United States are confused by that. They think a town is a village is a town, and but a town or a township is not a village. And the Smith family lived in Tunbridge Gore, which was an unsurveyed area at the bottom of the township. It wasn't actually part of the original Tunbridge Township. And they lived in an area that became Smith Settlement. Smith Settlement was not what we know of today as Tunbridge Village, which at the time they called the Market. And so we wanted to sort those details out, figure out who lived where, how did all the events play out, and what could we learn about the family's experiences there by doing archaeology at this site.
So this is essentially the Joseph Smith Sr. home in Vermont, is that right?
Correct. Well, it started out as the Asel and Mary Smith home.
Okay.
That Joseph...
And Asel was Joseph Sr.'s father.
Was his father. That Joseph Sr. and his older brother Jesse Smith went out and built a home, and then the family arrived. They built the home in 1790. The family arrives in 1791, and then it eventually becomes the home of Asel's son Joseph and his new bride Lucy, who lived there for a few years, for 7 years, until they moved to a new location. So.
And now I remember when talking with Dr. Ugo Perego, we don't really know where the Smith family came from. I think most people assume they came from England, but it could be Ireland. Do you have any insight onto that?
Only what Dr. Perego has shared with me in terms of the genetics, but we have done a lot of work on the English aspect of the family and their early American experience, and that will all come out later in some work that we're working together on. But yeah, the family appears to have come from Ireland, and then one of the sons, well, two of the sons went to England and then immigrated to the United States.
Well, cool. So yeah, I know there's a kind of a dead end there. We're not totally sure where the Smith family came from, but it sounds like it's probably Ireland. That's cool. So so you said that this Vermont town was I don't know, settled by Asel and Jesse. Is that right?
Asel brings his whole family, so Jesse and Joseph Asel Jr., their son Stephen, their daughters Sophronia, Sophia. Why am I missing her name? Anyway, and their daughters, and so they have 9 children that are living in the household with them. Jesse and their oldest daughter. It starts with a P. Give me some time, and I will eventually come back to her name. But she stays in Massachusetts for a little while, but comes later. But so the 9 of the children are living there with their parents initially on this home site. As we tried to figure out the details of it and the initial settlement, one of the sons describes it a little bit in his memories and about arriving there, and it being a small and made out of a bark roof and just logs. And so we wanted to know a little bit more about that. And we were able, through some archaeology, to figure out some of those details. We knew that when the family first settled there in the Tunbridge Gore, the home was very small. And you can imagine a family of that size being in about 120 square feet of space. And it was right on the cusp of winter, so they had to have a fire in there, but they didn't have a fireplace, a hearth and everything, so they would have had a hole in the top of the ceiling. We were able to figure out these are handmade bricks, folk kind of construction. Joseph Sr. and his brother Jesse would have made them, and you can see how they were unskilled in what they were doing, but they were doing the best they could. But they would have made those the following spring as they expanded.
So what year are we talking about approximately?
1790, the fall. They get there November of 1790, and they're building the home then. The family, I should step back. During the summer, they build a structure, and Joseph Sr. injures his leg in some way, and so he heads back down to Massachusetts while Jesse continues to finish the home. By some miracle, he meets them on the road. You can imagine how easy it would have been for them to miss each other. He would have gotten down to Massachusetts. The family is already gone. But he meets them on the road, and he's able to then take them back up to the home site.
So 1790, that's relatively close to the Revolutionary War period. Is there any evidence that they might have participated in the Revolution?
Asel did.
Asel did.
Asel was a soldier private in the war. Joseph Sr. was not, did not fight directly in the war. His son, Joseph Jr., later talks about his father fighting in the war. It seems that he's thinking more in terms of his forefathers. His grandfathers both fought in the war. A lot of other individuals, including a family member of his who's I hadn't thought this, but his family member is named Joseph, and it would be a Gould, Joseph Gould.
Too many Josephs here.
Yeah.
This is going to get confusing fast.
So his mother's brother becomes a famous soldier in the war. He's there at the Battle of Lexington. The bullets are flying around his head. He stands up. He feels that it's undignified for a captain to be kneeling down, crouching behind the wall as with his men. And so he's known as the hero of the Battle of Lexington because of that. But then there's some comments that maybe he wasn't very smart. And so kind of that he was heroic, but not particularly very smart because he stood up with all those bullets flying around him. But he's named Joseph, and his mother chooses the name Joseph for one of her sons as well. And there may be a connection between those two. Maybe kind of feeling that hero of the Battle of Lexington is who they were kind of looking toward as they named their son. So the Aisel and Mary come up and settle at the site with their family. And one of the things that we brought to this project was a different kind of sensibility in terms of doing history. Most historians are going to look through papers, lots and lots of papers, read all the records, and then you piece together the details. We looked at a lot of sources that people don't usually look at, one of those being the landscape itself. What can we learn from looking at their property? We know that these are their fences. We know that this is their land. We look through the property deeds, and we look through the documents first to confirm those things. But then we learned through looking carefully at the land that the family had plowed it a few times, but not heavily. One of the things that you find in old growth forest is you find pillows and cradles. You find high kind of mounded areas and then little divoted areas where the trees, as they fall over and they pull all the dirt up with their roots, and then those roots decay and they leave a little pillow of dirt, and then the cradle where the roots had once been. That's what you find in old growth forest. And as they came in and cleared the land, they plowed it a few times to turn it into pasture, but they didn't continue to plow it as though they were growing crops. And you still, therefore, find those pillows and cradles in what had been pasture for almost 200 years until the mid-1950s time period when it returned to forested area. So it raised some questions in our minds, but it also provided some answers as to how the family was living, particularly that we knew that Mary had had a dairy before they came up, and that she continued that process. She had a dairy, they had cows, they're producing milk and cheese and shipping those down river. Aisel's making kegs. The kegs for butter are a specific size prescribed by law. He could make those for them. They could ship the butter downriver and make cheese and make a living doing that. They were paying for their land, able to buy more land, and it all began to expand as they're doing well.
I hope you enjoyed our conversation with Dr. Mark Staker. In our next conversation, we'll find out if Mark's work is as exciting as Indiana Jones.
So we'd gone down and knocked, and one of them chased us off the property with his shotgun, and not very happy with us. I'm sure he wouldn't have used it. I think he was just trying to make a statement of just stay away from us. Whatever you're doing, don't want to be involved in it.
If you'd like to hear the entire interview uncut, please subscribe for just $5 a month at patreon.com/gospeltangents, and you can hear the entire interview before everybody else. If you'd like to watch the entire video for just $8 a month, you can either subscribe on YouTube, Patreon, or my website, gospeltangents.com. Just click the yellow subscribe button, and I'll add you to our Gospel Tangents Insiders group so that you can see entire videos. For those interested in a PDF transcript, you can subscribe at either Patreon or on my website. For just $10 a month, I'll send you a PDF as soon as it's complete. If you'd like a copy of the paperback as well as a PDF, just sign up for $20 a month at either Patreon or my website, gospeltangents.com. Of course, you can buy individual transcripts at Amazon.com and just do a search for Gospel Tangents interview, and you can see all the things that we have there. Don't forget to support Gospel Tangents with an awesome t-shirt like one of these. You can subscribe at Apple Podcasts at tinyurl.com/gospeltangents. Get our latest updates at facebook.com/gospeltangents. Also, you can get our Twitter updates at Gospel Tangents. Click here to subscribe, here for a transcript, and over here we've got more of our great videos. Thanks again.